Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska. If this is your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Hello and good morning. Welcome to Tuesday. I know it said Monday there to begin with because I was a little confused, but we're all good now. It's Tuesday. And thank you so much for coming in and joining with us. I appreciate your patience with yesterday. It's so much better when I have a little chance to recharge and refresh after a long weekend of dog racing in Fairbanks. It was a fantastic weekend with the Open North American Championships. But it took me just that long to warm up. It took me almost the whole day yesterday oh man. You know, it wasn't like it was the coldest. It just, but it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun, good times. And it's good to be back, and we're ready to dive into this head first and see where things have got to go today. It is Tuesday, which means it's the weekly top three. Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets is in the green room right now. We're going to jump into this here in just a hot second. We're going to go through some big topics for the day, including, I'm sure we'll hit some of the quick hits on the governor's override or failure to override the governor's veto, I guess I should say. Then in hour two, we'll do some recap of my thoughts on some of the things that are going on. And then we will finish up, as always, on a Tuesday with Chris Story, the man from Homer, who will come in for our weekly life coaching lesson and uplift. So that's a full show of stuff today. But without further ado, let's just get started and get into the weekly top three with Brad Keithley, who joins us right now, and we'll see what he has to say. Hello, sir. How are you?
Michael, I'm doing great. Were you missing a layer up in Fairbanks, a layer of clothing?
You know, it's so funny because, I mean, I broadcast that race at 30 below and not been as cold as I was on Saturday. I was so cold on Saturday, both I and Arlie Reynolds, the color commentator who was there for me, we were both shivering. I mean, just by the end of the broadcast, it was just... it was like 10 degrees ambient, but the wind that was whipping around the mushers hall there just was sucking the life right out of both of us. Took me about an hour to get warm afterwards. Sat around in my car with the heated seats and the steering wheel and, shivered for a while. Probably because when I broadcast at 30 below, I was a little, I had the deeper, bigger gear on. Didn't think it was going to be that big a deal. So anyway, it was a great weekend of racing. It was a fantastic weekend of racing. I was glad to be headed home when it was all said and done.
On heated seats.
Oh man! The first night I climbed right in the car and had my hands wrapped around the steering wheel to get my hands warm, and it's just one of those things. Anyway, Brad, we're ready to dive into this thing and get to it. A lot of good stuff here. We're going to start off with a weekly top three, which includes the hypocrisy of the override. Now, for those who haven't heard, yesterday, the governor's veto, they failed to override it by one vote. But there was some hypocrisy baked in there, and you've got some thoughts on it. So let's get to it.
Well, I wrote that the lead for this particular part of the top three before the vote because it was the same regardless of how the vote came out, and it was written initially based on Elise Galvin's op-ed in the ADN in the Anchorage Daily News saying that she was going to vote for the override and she hoped her colleagues did also. And then it just became even stronger when I saw Will Stapp's, Representative Will Stapp from Fairbanks, his op-ed saying the same thing, essentially. I'm going to vote for the override in the Fairbanks News Miner. Neither of those op-eds, nor any other op-ed that I saw that I've seen throughout, with one exception that was in the Fairbanks News, or in the Frontiersman, the Matsu Frontiersman that we talked about a few shows back. None of those talked about, neither of Galvin's nor Stapp's talked about who pays, who should pay for this increase that they were so adamant ought to be passed, and we're voting for the override in order to pass. And it makes sense that they didn't talk about it, because who pays would have been middle and lower income Alaska families through PFD cuts. Essentially what this bill was, when you boil it down from a fiscal standpoint. I'm not going to get into it from an educational policy standpoint. There are others who can talk about that better. But from a fiscal standpoint, essentially what this vote was, the way it was set up, was a vote to make a permanent cut in the PFD and a permanent increase in the BSA at the expense of the PFD, because there isn't any other option on the table. And Elise Galvin and Will Stapp both were voting to make that permanent cut in the PFD in order to slide those dollars over to education. And the hypocrisy about that is they're voting on something that's not going to affect them. They're voting on something they're not going to have to pay. PFD cuts hit middle and lower income Alaska families far harder than they hit the top 20%. With the pay raise the legislature voted themselves last year that took effect this year, all of the legislators are in the top 20%. And I've gone through the analysis. I did an Alaska Landmine column a few weeks ago that looked particularly at the House Finance Committee that both Galvin and Stapp sit on, and looked at the members of that committee by income, because you can find that income through their APOC reports. Looked at the members of that committee, and all of the members of the committee were better off, made money using PFD cuts to fund government as opposed to a flat tax. Flat tax was better for the remaining 80% of Alaska families. And so essentially what these guys were doing, what Galvin and Stapp and the others who ultimately voted in favor of the override, and I've got the list here and I'm going to go through it in a second, but the others who voted in favor of the override were doing was saying, okay, look, I'm in favor of this permanent increase in the BSA, and I'm in favor of it because I don't have to pay for it. Look at this slick trick I've figured out. I can vote for this. I can be a hero to all those people dressed in red for Ed. I can be a hero to all of them, and I don't have to pay for it. I can slide the costs off on middle and lower income Alaska families. I would have a lot more respect for, and I would be inclined to listen to the arguments on the policy side a lot more if these legislators said, look, I think we ought to increase this spending and I'm willing to pay my share of it. But that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is saying, we ought to increase this this category of spending. And look, I don't have to pay for it. I figured out a way not to pay for it. All you rubes out there in the middle and lower income brackets, you get to pay for it. I don't have to pay for it. And it's just the hypocrisy of those op-eds, both Galvin's and Stapp's, that said, look, I'm trying to be a hero. I'm trying to do the right thing. Look at me. I'm going to vote for education, without talking about who pays for it, without saying, and I'm willing to pay my fair share also, without stepping up and saying there ought to be a better way, there ought to be a fairer way to pay for this. I mean, even talk about the oil companies. They ought to pay a fair share of this also, because they're pushing for it through the chambers of commerce. They want it.
Right.
They want better trained employees or better educated employees, or whatever the mantra of the day is. They want, but they don't want to pay for a share of it either. They want that increase in spending without an increase in revenue on their side. And it's just, and the hypocrisy of those voting for it in that regard is just amazing. And the list, looking at the Republicans who voted for it, the Republicans who are engaged in this hypocrisy, in addition, the ones who lined up with Elise Galvin on let's vote an increase, but in a way that we don't have to pay for it. Justin Ruffridge out of the Kenai, Will Stapp out of Fairbanks, Jesse Sumner out of the Mat-Su, Stanley Wright out of Anchorage on the House side. And then on the Senate side, Click Bishop, Jesse Bjorkman out of the Kenai, Kathy Giesel, James Kaufman, a guy who got elected saying, I'm a fiscal conservative. I can get this thing under control. I can control costs. I know how to do that. Voting for an increase without being willing to pay for it himself. Kelly Merrick, Bert Stedman, and Gary Stevens. That's the list. To me, all of these guys, all of these people, guys and gals, claim to be fiscal conservatives, claim to be, at the core of their being, that we're going to look out for you. We're going to look out for you, middle and lower income Alaska families. Elect us because we're the ones who are going to take care of you. And what they did was they voted to increase spending in a way that they didn't have to pay for. They're not looking out for middle and lower income Alaska families. They're looking out for themselves. After the pay raise they gave themselves that pushed them all into the top 20%, now they're voting to say, but we want to increase spending for this stuff and for other stuff. And we want you to pay for it. We're not going to pay for it. We want to push the costs off on the very people that we said we were being elected to protect. It's just the hypocrisy of what's going on here and what went on in that vote and what these people who claim to be fiscal conservatives did is just intense. I also want to say one other thing, and then I'll stop ranting here for a bit. But the real hero yesterday turns out not to have been anybody who was there, who was on the floor, who was otherwise around the building. Rob Yunt, candidate for Senate in the Mat-Su against David Wilson. David Wilson voted not to override the veto. If you want to look, if you want to look for the 40th, the vote that switched the balance. David Wilson votes with a Senate majority every step of the way. He's been there for all of the spending increases. He's been there for all of the PFD cuts with the Senate majority every step of the way. Yesterday, he didn't do that. Yesterday, he voted against the Senate majority. He voted with Shower, Hughes, Myers, and that was it. He voted with the fiscal conservatives. And why did he do that? Because of Rob Yunt.
Right.
So,
he could see it. Right.
So the hero of the moment, really, in if you want to pick out somebody that's the hero of the moment in terms of the vote yesterday, is Rob Yunt. I don't know what Rob Yunt's position is on the PFD. I hope it's more in line with Rob Myers than Jesse Sumner. But he turned David. I'm sure he didn't talk to David Wilson about it at all. But he turned David Wilson's vote back over to the bright side, back over to the side that was not.
Yeah, that was the pressure of the reelection bid, because he knew that he's under pressure and he's under scrutiny right now, and he's got to stand by that vote. And I did want to point out one other piece of hypocrisy here, because when I read it, it was excuse me, the quote from Bert Stedman in the Alaska Beacon. Senator Stedman reminded his colleagues that SB 140 was originally written to address rural internet needs. He said, now to access faster internet next year, it's all on the line for dozens of rural schools. And here's the quote. I find it distasteful, extremely distasteful, that the rural children of our state are virtually held hostage over our squabbling for the base student allocation. He later called them collateral damage. This is the guy that was holding the entire state, the entire corridor of the Knik Goose Bay Road, people, the most dangerous road in the state. He was holding that hostage over some prerequisite funding that he wanted as well. And he's done this several times, by the way, held other things. The fact that he is going on to say, I found it distasteful that we're holding people hostage. What a bunch of crap. What a bunch of, just absolute. I read that quote this morning. My eyeballs almost rolled in the back of my head and locked that way because he just, again, there's a massive amount of hypocrisy here, Brad.
There is.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is. And it is all over the place. I mean, you're correct to point out that part by Bert, the fact that he's holding things hostage. I mean, Lyman also took off on a tear yesterday about internet funding for rural Alaska, after Lyman, for decades has held power in the House Finance Committee and held up things and held them hostage for various other things. There is a lot of hypocrisy going on that side as well.
Right.
But the thing that, Jesse Sumner, never, ever, 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 ever again tell me that you're looking out for middle and lower income Alaska families in the Mat-Su. Never say that. Because you're going to be struck by lightning if you do.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not true. You're looking out for yourself.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaska's for Sustainable Budgets. That's number 1. 2 and 3 dead ahead. We continue with the weekly top 3, the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Back with more right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, in the break right now. I read that this morning and I was just, oh, really? I mean, you are the master of holding things hostage. You are the master of this manipulation, and yet you find this distasteful. Okay, all right.
It's when somebody else does it to him that it's distasteful.
When the shoe's on the other foot that you're like, oh, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, yeah, you think? Turnabout's fair play as far as that goes. I mean, it's just, yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, I think the whole thing, when I saw that David Wilson had voted to uphold the veto, I was just like, yeah, because he's up for re-election and he knows there's already, the whispers on the wind in the Mat-Su are loud and clear at this point that he is on his way out and he's desperately trying to find anything to cling to relevance and to stay in the position right now.
Yeah, well, Rob, without saying a word to Wilson, Rob's the one that turned him and got his vote right. I am sure that David's taking a lot of flack from the Senate majority. Giesel and others are probably, taking him to task for it, but survival is an amazing thing, I guess. Maybe that's what Sumner and Ruffridge and Stapp and Wright tell themselves. Hey, I've got a family to feed. I need to find a tax form that doesn't affect me, that pushes the cost down to somebody else so I don't have to pay it. Maybe they tell themselves they're in survival mode too. But you cannot, Michael. Elise Galvin a long time ago crossed over to that side. But you cannot tell me you're a fiscal conservative. You cannot tell me that you're protecting middle and lower income Alaska families when 80% of Alaska families, when the vote comes, and this vote was a permanent cut to the PFD in order to fund a permanent increase to K through 12. When the vote comes, you vote for it because it's financed in a way that makes sure you don't have to pay for it. You can't tell me you're a fiscal conservative. You can't tell me you're looking out for the middle and lower income Alaska families in your district when you do something like that.
Donna asked the question that I was thinking as soon as I saw that Wilson was a no vote. She says the Senate majority is a binding caucus. Will they kick out Wilson like they have the others? That's a good question. I mean, that was a high priority for the Senate majority. Will they kick him out now?
I'm not.
But
He's on Senate Finance. He's a sure vote for. I mean, they've set it up. Keep in mind how they've gone through Senate Finance, right? They had Shower on it, they had Hughes on it, then Shower got taken off, and Hughes was still on it, and then they didn't like Hughes anymore because she wouldn't follow the company line, so she was off. They put David Wilson on, and David Wilson's been like an automaton, right? Just Bert says vote. Bert says vote this way. Bam, voting this way. I don't know. They don't have anybody else from Matsu they can put on the finance committee, and it would be pretty amazing if you took out Matsu, if you took out the senator from Matsu and didn't have a Matsu rep on the finance committee. So,
well, I suppose they could always put Sumner on there if they decided they wanted to.
Senate.
Oh,
Finance.
for the Senate Finance. Yeah, I'm sorry. I apologize. Anyway, it's interesting to watch. And you actually went down to Juneau. I saw somebody say, thank you for your testimony in Juneau. I apparently missed it. What did you go down for?
I went down at the request of Tom McKay. Thank you, Tom, if you're listening today, to testify on Cook Inlet gas. And the amazing thing about that is, as you've listened on the show, I've not necessarily been in agreement with Tom's direction that he's his initial direction on Cook Inlet gas, but in openness, he said he wanted to listen to different viewpoints. He invited me down to testify, and I did on Cook Inlet gas. So if you want to find the testimony and see the tape of the testimony, it's on my Substack page, or it's on the legislative website for the House Resources last Friday.
All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We continue here, kicking things off. Number 2 is dead ahead. We will we'll continue on and see what more we got here. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Please like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. Here we go.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Huh. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, comes in, continues with us here. We're on to our second of the weekly top 3. The second one today, talking about the spring forecast and the yippee part of that, which apparently is, yippee, look at all this money. Or as to quote Natasha von Imhoff, we've got so much money, we don't know how to spend it all. But Brad, give me the yippee moment here.
Well, we talked about the spring revenue forecast on last week's show, and it came in as consistent with what my discussion was there. Some changes here and there, but not any significant material change in the revenue outlook. Oil prices are higher than they were in the fall revenue forecast for FY25, and FY25 is what matters here. Oil prices were higher than they were then. Than they were in the fall forecast, but production volumes continue to go down. Production volumes from Prudhoe and other legacy fields, the traditional fields, continue to go down faster than what the forecasts consistently have been saying. And we have a faster rate of decline going on up there. And that's something I want to dig into in a coming landmine column, or probably both also on the show here, because that's a troublesome development, and the combination of the increased oil prices but lower production than in the fall forecast resulted in some uptick in revenues for FY25. The reaction to it, I should have expected this, but the reaction to it just sort of took me aback as I was reading through the various columns where the reporters were talking about the reaction of legislators to the slightly increased revenues for FY25. It wasn't. I expect too much. It wasn't okay. We can make it an additional step on toward the statutory PFD. It wasn't okay. We can put some money back. We can pay back some of the CBR that we drew down, which is essentially a tax on future Alaska generations. We can pay some of that back. Pay some of that back. We can equalize some of what we've taken to make our lives better in the last decade. There was no reaction like that. It was much more yippee. Look what we can spend on. Look, we have all this. We have additional revenue we can spend on it. And Click Bishop, he's almost the equivalent of Bert Stedman. If you want a bad quote, you can just look for what Click said about something, in the same way that you can look for what Bert said something about it. But in the James Brooks article in the Alaska Beacon, Click Bishop was quoted as saying, was among the lawmakers who said they hoped some of the additional money, and to put that in context, some of the additional money will be spent on maintenance projects statewide. We've got a lot of need out there. That snow removal number statewide. Maybe we've got some wiggle room now to help with snow removal. In Western Alaska, it's embarrassing to look at the black mold in those schools, fire alarm systems that are defunct. So hopefully we can throw a lifeline for deferred maintenance at our K through 12 schools. Nothing about maybe we need to reprioritize. We got black mold. Maybe we need to take something out of someplace else, in order to cover that. If we've got a problem with snow removal, maybe we need to take some spending out of someplace else, or maybe we need to go revisit oil taxes, or maybe we need to get a fairer tax system statewide. None of that. It was yippee, we got more money in the state revenue forecast, a very thin amount of additional money in the state forecast. Let me think of all I can spend it on.
Right. I mean, nobody's asking the question, why was that maintenance deferred in the first place? I mean, that was supposed to be stuff we put all this money into these buildings, this huge investment in all this buildings and property. Why would we not maintain it? Oh, because we've got more important things to spend that money on right now. We'll just push that off until sometime in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I mean, by the time that Click was finished talking, all of the money plus some more PFD cuts were already done. I mean, they were already out the door. He'd already spent it all, and he'd spent even more of that. And the reaction on the House side, Delana voted right on the veto override yesterday, but Delana just sometimes their mouth gets ahead of her. And in the reaction on the House side, they asked Delana Johnson, who's co-chair of House Finance, her reaction, and there wasn't anything in there about PFDs. There wasn't anything in there about paying back the CBR. Two of the things that are, I think, the most fiscally conservative steps you should be thinking about immediately when you look at a revenue forecast and it's forecasting additional funds. Nothing about that. It was, well, maybe we can pay for some of the stuff we've already committed to, and look at bolstering up the spending side of the budget, or paying for the spending side of the budget. Their reactions are just wrong. I mean, their reactions are, yippee, I got more money. How do I spend it? Yippee, I got more money. What special interest do I want to rain on? Since we've turned over all this money to the legislature, what special interest do I want to sprinkle some additional fairy dust on? It's not, how do I pay back, the loan we've taken from future generations by drawing down the CBR? None of that. Or how do we distribute the commitment we have to Alaska families to distribute the PFD? None of that. It's which special interest can I sprinkle additional fairy dust on? And that's just disappointing. I mean, we don't have legislators who are thinking about, if we do, they didn't get quoted. They didn't get asked. Probably another problem with the media. They go to the same people and get the same answers. But we didn't have anybody quoted as saying, CBR, we need to pay back our responsibility to future generations. We need to pay back the loan we took from future generations first, because we made our lives better by drawing down on that savings account, drawing down on the money that ought to be passed on to future generations. We made our lives better. Let's do something toward paying back that obligation. None of that. And none of, oh my God, yeah, we need to, live up to the statutory PFD. None of that. It was just how do I spend more? And that's, That's just indicative of how our legislature has come to think about things. Oh, goody, more revenue. What can I spend it on?
Right. Well,
What
no,
can I-
exactly. I was quoting Natasha. That was from, again, we had another revenue forecast that popped up, and all of a sudden they discovered that they had, I don't know, several $100 million more that they were expecting to come in. And then she was basically like, well, we've got so much more money, we don't know what to spend it on. Well, how about we pay back the $10 billion that's owed to the CBR? I mean, that's an easy one right there. That's a big hole that you could just suck all the money into. But no, nobody talks about that. It's immediately like, okay, well, how do we spend it? Oh, look, I found $10,000 in the couch cushion. How do we spend that? Maybe we should pay down our debt. Maybe we should put some money back to things that we owe, including the CBR.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't think that way, Michael. There's another, I wrote my column last week in the landmine was basically another problem with these revenue forecasts. Revenue forecasts bounce up and down. And I think I've come to think that's a big part of the fiscal problem we've gotten ourselves into. We see money going up, and the reaction is, how do I spend it? And then you commit to spending, you commit to making, additional capital projects. That was one of Delena's things. Maybe we can spend it on capital projects. We commit to building additional things, and then we can't fund them. We can't fund the programs. We can't do maintenance on the buildings, on the additional things we built. And the revenue forecasts go down, and then the revenue forecasts go up. I think everybody who's really thought about this issue deeply understands that we ought to be that these revenue forecasts ought to be sort of nice to have things. But we ought to be basing our budget on averages, money in the bank.
Right.
We do that with the PFD. We do that. Well, back when we had a statutory PFD, we do that on averages. We do the POMV draw on historic averages. We look at money that we have in the bank and drawing it at that rate. But on oil, the thing that really drives the budget on oil, we just bounce up and down along the road.
This has been our problem for years, Brad. I mean, we go back to the Parnell administration. Remember when he built a budget that was based on forecasting that at the time when they first started, it was $115 a barrel, and then oil cratered down to the $80 mark, $75, $80 mark. But he was holding to that $115 a barrel projection for his budgeting. I mean, this has been part of the problem the whole time. We're betting on the if-come of these projections, and that's why plank number 4 of the Charter of Changes is change the funding, change the way that we do it. I've advocated for an average take for years. That's what we should do. We should look at what our average has been for the last 5 years, and whatever that average is over 5 years, that's where we should start the budget, or just zero-based budgeting. I mean, one of the two. We can't just keep propping it up every year and hoping on the best, which is what we're doing right now.
Yeah, basically what we're doing now, oil prices will go back down. I mean, you can bet on that as certainly as anything you can bet on. Oil prices will go back down. But what we're doing is, especially with Delena's, let's put it off in the capital budget. Let's just build more things. We're riding the peaks, right? We got more money. Bam, we can do more spending. We got more money. Bam, we can do additional programs. We got more money. Bam, we can increase the capital budget. But what's going on in the valleys? In the valleys is, well, we'll just take more out of the PFD, or we'll just tax middle and lower income Alaska families more to pay for it. Used to be we'll tax future generations by taking it out of the CBR until we took all their money, and now we're just going to tax middle and lower income Alaska families to fill in the valleys, and the budget's riding the peaks. So
you'd think you'd learn from all the past mistakes of spending $15 billion out of the CBR that we just couldn't continue along that path. But no, they seem to be happy to move right along. Brad, give us a tease for number 3 here before we go.
Well, number 3 is a bit more long-term. There was an article in The Economist that really, hit me in the face about where the oil industry is going. And I think it's a great article. I want to commend it for broad reading, but I also think it's something that legislative candidates and gubernatorial candidates ought to be talking about in future election cycles, because it's going to greatly impact Alaska as it develops.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We continue with more here. The weekly top 3 continues. Your home for common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. The Michael Duke Show. Back with more right after this.
listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
In the break right now, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Greg makes a great point. More capital projects. We can't maintain the ones we already built. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? The state's got what, $750 million in deferred maintenance hanging out there that they haven't, that they're not taking. I mean, we should fix this black mold in this. Yes, we probably should. That should probably be a priority. We probably should sacrifice some of these lesser needed programs to make sure that the schools and the buildings that we have right now stay upright and maintained and safe to occupy. I mean, yeah, you'd think that would be a priority. Oh, there's a special place in hell for the guy who thought up deferred maintenance at this point, Brad. It's absolutely crazy.
Well, and to think you're only going to get deferred maintenance run down when you have bumps in spending. I mean, that's deferred maintenance doesn't wait for bumps in spending. They don't wait for good revenue forecasts. They're sitting there getting worse and worse and worse. So yeah, we ought to be funding those on a regular basis as opposed to, I mean, Michael, there's so much stuff that we ought to be doing. We ought to be paying back the CBR. We ought to be taking back this jumbo loan from future generations. We ought to be paying it back. We ought to be distributing the PFD in accordance with the statute, in accordance with Hammond's vision to build up a private sector in this state. We ought to be doing maintenance on a regular schedule as opposed to deferring it. But that the attraction of, oh my gosh, I got people in my office who want me to spend more on this, and I've got favored industries that I want to sprinkle additional fairy dust on. We have legislators who cannot overcome that.
Senator Rob Myers corrected me. I was wrong. I remember now. The $750 million number was the Anchorage number. Rob said the last time he checked, it was over $10 billion in deferred maintenance in the state of Alaska. So 10 billion with a B. So that means between the CBR and the deferred maintenance, we got a $20 billion hole, and we're out there saying, oh, look, we could spend it on the next patch of sprinkles that we need to spend it on. I mean, $10 billion. You want to build more, and yet we can't even keep up what we've got. You people.
That's a good observation. I've never thought of it that way. I've never thought of adding deferred maintenance as another borrowed account. To the CBR, but that's a great way of looking at it. Because that's another loan we've taken from future generations, because we're sticking them with the bill for the deferred maintenance, or we're sticking them with rotting buildings as a result of not funding maintenance on an ongoing basis.
Well, I mean, I've always thought the arrogance of people to go, oh, well, we need maintenance on this building or that building, but really this program is more important. I have voted against anything that is deferred maintenance. When I was on the borough assembly, I ranted several times about this. The Fairbanks North Star Borough, a place that's got less than 100,000 people, had $250 million in deferred maintenance. I mean, that's insanity for a place that had was, when I left, it was like $150 million a year annually in budgeting, and they had $280 million in deferred maintenance. I'm like, how can any of those folks be trusted? We've given you our money. You've built all these facilities. You keep saying it's important, and yet at the same time, you keep taking money from those maintenance, the things that are supposed to maintain these investments, and you spend it on other stuff. That is the most offensive thing that I could think of.
Yeah, that's a great way. That's a great way of looking at it. I mean, it's a great way of thinking about it. I need to factor that into my charts somehow, and add it to because I talk about paying back the CBR, amortizing the CBR on a set schedule over a certain period of time, paying back the debt, the loan we've taken from future generations.
Donna, she's just a ray of sunshine today. Don't forget the unfunded liabilities. I mean, that's another $7 billion just for the pension fund right now in unfunded liability. Oh, we're up to $27 billion. Okay.
All right. So we put all of that in context, and now we get a little bit of additional money that shows up in the spring revenue forecast. Money we shouldn't even be paying attention to because we ought to be budgeting on the basis of averages, annual average, historical averages. But we get a little bit of money in the budget, and now we're going to spend it on new programs, new capital projects, or we're going to spend it on increases of the BSA, or we're going to spend it on this.
Why would you spend it on new capital projects when you can't keep the capital projects you've got up? I mean, it's madness. It's total and absolute madness at this point. All right. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're going to dive into this. Brad's mind is blown. I can see it. He's like thinking about all those billions of dollars that we just, yeah, exactly. We owe it all. 30 billion just in what we just talked about right there. All right, here we go. Jumping back in. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Let's do it.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. What does that even mean at this point? We have no idea. We can't even figure out what that means. What is that? The word, you keep using that word sustainable. I don't think it means what you think it means. We know what it means. Unfortunately, it seems to be a foreign language down in Juneau. Brad Keithley, the weekly top three. Number three. I leave it to you, my friend. Number three.
So there's an article in this week's edition of The Economist, and The Economist, I think, is a great resource to tap into occasionally to understand bigger themes of what's going on out there in the world. And this one is the headline of it is "Oil's Endgame Could Be Highly Disruptive. The oil shocks of the future will be driven by demand, not supply." And it is an article that looks into the rapidly approaching future that the world says that they've set for themselves to reduce carbon emissions of ramping down oil demand as a way of doing that, converting oil demand over to other non as carbon intensive sources of energy. And it's a great insight into what goes on. And keep in mind, I have trouble doing this sometimes, but keep in mind that 2050, which is the target date that we've now set for all these reductions in CO2 emissions, all this reduction in carbon, 2050 is only 26 years away. It is almost as close to where we are now as 2020. Or 2000 is to where we are now. We're 26 years away from 2050. We're 24 years away from 2000. And when you put it in that sort of perspective, I mean, 2000 to 2024 to me is sort of like a blink of an eye, right? I can remember exactly where I was in 2000. It just doesn't seem that long ago. And 2050, which is the date for all of that we're targeting to get all these CO2 emissions down, is as near as that is looking in the rearview mirror. So I'm starting to see these articles. I'm starting to see these thought pieces about what that means for oil's endgame. And it's really insightful. I mean, not only do they have the world's largest supply of reserves, but the Middle East also has the largest supply of low carbon reserves. And the thought is that through carbon taxes or in some fashion, we will start squeezing out the higher carbon sources of energy, higher carbon sources of oil as we get toward 2050, and we'll ramp down toward the lowest carbon sources of oil from that time forward. And the Middle East has not only the largest source of supply of oil, but they also the largest reserves, but they also have the largest reserves. Perversely, and this is what the article says, perversely, this shift will grant some producers more market power. The biggest, least carbon intensive, and cheapest reserves of petroleum by far are found in Saudi Arabia and the immediate OPEC neighbors in the Persian Gulf. As the market for oil shrinks, their share of production will soar. Depending on the pace of energy transition, the cabal could command a market share of half or even 2/3 of global supply, of global output by 2050, according to BP, an oil firm, compared with less than 40% market share today. So by some measures, the thought is that as we shrink down oil, we're going to put more and more of command of the market into the Middle East, which, results in likely would result in increased price. At least some people say it results in increased price. There are others who suggest that'll be chipped away in certain fashions, but likely results in increased price, dramatically increased price, which frankly, if you look at economics, will then drive more conversion to lower cost energy sources, by then lower cost energy sources as we go. I tried to think about what the consequence of this is for Alaska, and what this future means for Alaska. And there's a couple ways I've thought about it. One is we are really fortunate that we're getting 2 new big development projects underway as we hit this ramp down. One is Conoco's Willow project, and the other is Oil Search's Pikka project, and Santos, I guess now, Pikka project. And those 2 big projects, the way that North Slope, the way the long-lived reserves on that you find in the North Slope projects go, those long-lived reserves will carry us a significant way toward 2050. And if oil price goes up, as the market narrows and oil price goes up, then we should be a beneficiary of that. But the other way to think about it is maybe we don't get any more. That Willow and Pikka is sort of the end of the line in terms of what Alaska is going to get. We're not the highest carbon region in the world, highest oil carbon content region in the world, but we're not the lowest either. And as demand ramps down, given this future, we may not get any more than Willow and Pikka. And I sort of back into a lot of concerns about what's going on. Why do these production numbers from the North Slope, from the traditional sources on the North Slope, keep ramping down faster than what the projections are? If we're going to ramp down those traditional sources fairly fast, and we get Willow and Pikka, but that's sort of the end of the line, then we're facing a future where we're going to be having a ramp down on oil production faster than I think some people have taken into account. A lot of different factors in there, but the economist makes a compelling case that we're coming into a future where we're going to hit that. I mean, people say, "Oh no, we're never going to do CO2 reduction. We just ought to accept that." I don't think that's true. I think the world is going to force a lower CO2 content world, and we need to be thinking about what that means. It's an issue, frankly, that I want legislators, from my personal perspective as a voter, I want legislators and gubernatorial candidates to be thinking about and talking about. I want them to be thinking about what it means for Alaska to have an oil world, as the economist is describing, an oil world where the Middle East is getting more and more control. That has an effect on price, but it also has an effect as this shrinking oil world sort of sloughs off non-Middle East sources of supply. What that means for Alaska oil development. We're only 26 years away from 2050, and that can happen in the blink of an eye. We need to be following programs, policies. We need to be thinking through the consequences now to prepare us for the ramp down that goes on before we hit 2050.
Is there any way for us to? I mean, is there any way for us to avoid that? I mean, again, Alaska. You're saying Saudi has the lowest carbon crude out there. Is there any way to mitigate those things in the future?
Expensively, and maybe some of those things will be justified, but carbon extraction or carbon control or carbon sequestration is something that you can do. But it's a lot of that is in the quality of the crude that you're producing, and the CO2 that's embedded in the crude. So it's really hard to take steps to strip that carbon out of the crude on its way before it heads off to its uses. So I mean, that's one of the things that I guess we ought to be thinking about. Are there things we can do to better position Alaska in this narrowing crude future? But Alaska is so dependent on oil, and will continue to be dependent on oil until we find a different way of establishing our revenue stream in the state government, or contract the size of state government to sort of get ourselves prepared for a lower revenue future. It is the one thing that's certain is it's going to affect Alaska as a heavily dependent economy, heavily dependent on crude economy. That future is going to affect Alaska, and we need leaders who are thinking about that, who are saying things like, is there a way we can get the carbon content of our crude down? Are there steps we can take to position ourselves better into that future, to maintain our production better into that future? We need people thinking about that, talking about that, considering that, developing policies in response to that. Just sliding along as we've been doing is sort of a recipe for disaster, because we slide into this future as production from traditional sources, legacy sources, ramp down faster and faster than the projections are telling us that we're going to do. And as we don't get follow-on projects behind Willow and Pika, we sort of hit that future, face on fairly quickly.
We can't even get people to think beyond the next election cycle. 26 years, that's a millennium from now for most of these people. They're not even considering it, which is unfortunate, because, again, if that does come about and we lose the ability to use oil as the main force of state revenue, we're going to have some issues. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friend. As always, it's good to talk with you. Appreciate you coming on board.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Folks, we got more coming up. Hour 2 is dead ahead. We're going to have some discussions on these things and more. We will return. Plus, Chris Story joins us. The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. I mean, how do we expect these people to be thinking those 26 years in the future, Brad? I mean, at this point, how do we get people to even think about it? We're duking it out year to year on things that should be taken care of and should be laid out and planned, and we can't even get, a 2-year plan, let alone a 5-year plan, let alone a 20-year plan. This is a huge problem.
We need to be electing people who talk about plans, Michael, who talk about taking into consideration these sort of factors and develop fiscal measures that respond to them. I mean, we've now Matt Buxton, who I agree with often, not always, but I agree with often. Matt Buxton had a great comment yesterday. He said, we have now made the BSA another PFD that will be determined by each legislature on the basis of whatever the forces of politics are at the time. And it's another one of these near-term diversions that we're going to have, near-term, debates that we're going to have, like we do with the PFD that just suck all the oxygen out of the room. We have stopped being a state that's ruled by law, and we have put ourselves into a situation. It began with the PFD. Matt's comment is that we're now subjecting the BSA to the same forces. We pass a statute. We have laws on the books that tell us how to deal with this stuff. and put it on autopilot so we can think about other things. But now we've put ourselves in a situation where none of that stuff's on autopilot. It's all up for debate every year. How much the PFD is going to be is up for debate every year. How much the BSA is going to be is now up for debate every year. Those are two huge things, and they suck a lot of oxygen. We ought to look for people who say, look, we need to put that stuff behind us. We need to settle these things once and for all, put them on autopilot, respect the rule of law. When we pass a statute, follow it, as opposed to, just throw it out the window at any given point in time. Respect the rule of law, follow the statutes, and think about the bigger things that we're facing, or else we're going to stumble into that future unprepared, and it's going to do very bad things to us if we're unprepared for it. I think part of what it is we look for candidates who say, let's respect the rule of law, let's settle this stuff through statutes, let's respect that. And if we need a constitutional amendment that says we're going to respect the rule of law, let's put that in the Constitution, and go on from and build a future looking forward, as opposed to always fighting about the past, always fighting about the things that we've created in the past. And I guess part of what struck me about this Economist article is there are things, big things, sitting out there, not big positive things, big challenges, big risks that are sitting out there in front of Alaska. We're not even paying attention to, because we're all busy fighting about the battle of the moment, refighting the battle of the PFD, and now refighting the battle of the BSA, fighting the battle of the moment, as opposed to looking forward and seeing what we're running into. And we've left the next generation with nothing in the bank to deal with it. We've drained the CBR. This generation has made its life better by draining the CBR, putting off, the hard choices by continuing to tap into that savings until there's nothing there. We're passing on nothing, no shock absorbers for future generations. We've used up all the shock absorber for ourselves. So, we're battling all these past things. We can't get anything settled because we have no rule of law anymore. We just thrown fiscal statutes out the window. We can't get anything settled about the past. We've drained down the shock absorbers that were meant to be there to help generations. Our generation, we drained it down. We need to pay it back, but we've drained the shock absorber that's meant to be there to help generations accommodate to changes. We've drained it down. We're not paying it back, and we're facing these big things. So to me, it's saying we need a candidate that says, let's settle the past. Let's have rule of law again. Here's how I propose to have rule of law. Now, let's start looking forward, and let's start positioning Alaska to be ready for these things that are going to hit us in the future.
I mean, this is all well and good, Brad. This is all well and good in theory. Unfortunately, the reality is it's just the next cycle. It's just the next election cycle. We got to make sure that we get taken care of, and nobody is thinking about the long-term stuff. If they were thinking about the long-term stuff, they'd be looking at the 10-year forecast and realizing that what we're on right now is an unsustainable grade. I mean, they would understand that already, but that what you're talking about is way too big and amorphous even for that.
But it's something. I mean, I guess my point is, and I don't mean to belabor it, but I guess I do mean to belabor it. It's something that's sitting out there, Michael. It's something big that's sitting out there, that because it's hitting our core industry and our core resource is going to have a big impact on us. And it's something, if we don't think about it, if we don't prepare for it, if we don't take the steps to position future generations, give them back the shock absorber, if we don't prepare future generations to deal with it, it's just going to wipe them out.
Unfortunately, you're not in charge. That's unfortunate at this point. All right, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on board.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that does it for hour one. Hour two is coming right now. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. We'll be back with more in just a second.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the interwebs at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. Good morning and welcome to hour 2 of the big radio broadcast. It is the Michael Dukes Show. As we continue our discussions, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, was just our guest, and we just finished up with him during the top of the hour break. And finishing up with the last of the weekly top 3, talking about the projections and this article in The Economist talking about where oil is going over the next 26 years. And the fact that the world is pushing. Now, whether we want it to or not, this is where the powers that be throughout the globe are pushing, right, is for this lower CO2, CO and CO2 emission base that they're pushing for right now, which is eventually going to mean them trying to phase out all, as much of the carbon footprint as they can with all the oil and gas and everything else. And what that means for Alaska, of course, is that eventually our oil resources will not be needed anymore, which unfortunately is not good for the state of Alaska, since our entire economy, but it seems like the public economy anyway, is based on that oil for the revenues generated to run the state. And of course, all the ancillary and add-on industries and everything else that are around that on the private side as well. And the hope that somehow we will be able to continue at the current pace without the oil economy is far-fetched. It really is. But the idea that somehow our elected officials are going to, read this article that Brad just talked about and come to the same conclusion, I mean, it's a fantasy, right? I just told Brad during the break, I'm like, these folks have a hard time thinking beyond the next 2-year election cycle, let alone into the 5 and 10 and 20-year mark. You're talking about something that's coming 26 years down the road. And these folks, they just can't even conceive of that. I mean, if they could, they would look at the 10-year forecast for the state, look at those numbers, look at the graphs and the projections that, Brad has talked about ad nauseum on this program over the last 5 years, and see that the projections are that we cannot continue to sustain the government at the level that we have right now, let alone with any increases. Just the current spend right now, we can't continue over the next 5-6 years. We're in, according to the projections, we're going to be in deficit in 2 or 3 years anyway. And so now to say, by the way, in 26 years, all the talking heads and the big brain people say that, there won't be the demand for Alaska oil because the world will is trying to transition to this zero carbon footprint thing. And the only thing, only people producing oil will be those in the Middle East with the least carbon-based crude. To think that we're going to look at that and somebody in the States going to say, hey, whoa, by the way, the party's going to be over in 26 years. Nobody's doing. I mean, right now we're running wide open towards the Gulch, right, on the train with the bridge out, and everybody's like, pour it on, baby, pour it on. To think that we're going to think that we would find that gumption in our guts to actually call it like it is and say that we can't continue this is, I mean, unrealistic, to say the least. Unrealistic. Now we have this veto that happened yesterday, the veto override attempt, which failed, by the way, for those of you who are just joining us and hadn't heard what went on in the legislature yesterday. The veto override failed by 1 vote, which means that we're going to be back duking it out over education spend and everything else. And I would agree with Brad. Brad said that he was in agreement with Matt Buxton, that Buxton said the BSA is going to be the new PFD, that every year there's going to be a battle over something like this. The problem, of course, is the problem, of course, with this is that any change to the BSA is a permanent change. Whereas with the PFD, and they can decide it every year and do whatever they want, but every time they add something to the BSA, it is forever at this point, because there's no way they're going to go backwards in it. And it is basically committing us to spend that money year upon year for the entire foreseeable future. Are my feelings hurt that the BSA increase did not go in? No, not at all. Because again, I understand that a BSA increase does not necessarily translate to, kids in the classroom and money's actually making down into the actual teaching part of the education budget. That a lot of those dollars are being sucked up by overhead and facilities and administration and everything else. So, I'm not too hurt by that, and I would rather have one-time expenditures. I would rather have one-time expenditures put in there rather than, basically, encumbering ourselves for the foreseeable future with money that eventually is just going to be unsustainable, that we're just not going to be able to afford to pay year upon year. But by doing so, we would commit ourselves basically to the foreseeable future with the decision to increase any BSA increase. And I mean, I guess, thank goodness it was only up to the $600 mark. I mean, could you imagine what it would have been like if it was the $1,413 mark that they kept, pumping for and saying that's what they needed? I mean, billions of dollars into the future. We're already spending more on education than any other item in the budget, but we need more. We need more. Donna just corrected me and said the BSA is no different than the PFD statute. Well, true, but again, we've seen that the likelihood or the appetite to cap a BSA or to retard or to remove or to downgrade the BSA is really probably what the PFD was in the early aughts, right? Where nobody wanted to touch the PFD. It was political suicide. And I think that proved true. Obviously, with Bill Walker, you saw what happened to him, but the damage was done at that point. The damage was done. And without some kind of requirement to make sure that those dollars actually go where they need to go in regards to making sure that they get into actual instructional, to the instruction line, into the classroom, that those dollars get there. Any money that we're throwing at the BSA is no guarantee. Although you love to read the headlines. You love to read what the news media writes about it. Oh, any BSA increase is immediately going to help your kids. Your kids. I mean, they're already spending $2.8 billion on education for 140,000 kids. How much more is needed to do an adequate job? I mean, an adequate job. Right now, we're 49th in achievement out of 50, pick your stat, 48th, 49th, 50th. We're right in there on all these different metrics when it comes to education and aptitude and the nation's scorecard and everything else. We're already, how much more do we need to spend when it's nearly half the state budget to take care of those kids? I mean, so I'm not too bent out of shape about this. You hear the hue and cry. You hear the quotes out of the articles. On this veto override, the Alaska Beacon has got a piece up here from James Brooks and Claire Stremple talking about it. Tom Claymire, the president at the NEA Alaska, the state teachers union, of course, says, I'm afraid the pink slips are going out. Schools are going to close, and our kids have yet to feel the depth of this crisis. Because, of course, we couldn't do more with what we have. We couldn't do better with what we have. If you don't give us more, well, we're just going to make everybody's going to feel the pain. Everybody's going to feel the pain on this. Senate Majority Leader Kathy Giessel is quoted. She's among the legislators who said that restarting work on education, because the bill has now been vetoed and failed, would mean a lack of attention to other priorities, including the impending South Central energy crunch. It certainly sucks all the air out of the room. Well, I guess now you guys know how we feel about the PFD, because that's where we are right now. But again, the biggest quote that gets to me, is the one from Senator Bert Stedman. Senator Bert Stedman, the Republican from Sitka, reminded his colleagues that SB 140 was originally written to address rural internet needs. Don't even get me started on spending millions of dollars on old-fashioned wired internet when you have something like Starlink that's available to you, but instead we're going to spend millions of dollars putting physical fiber across thousands of miles of tundra to be able to hook these people up to spend $400 or $500 a month for what Starlink can offer for $90. I mean, just don't even get me started on that. But Stedman says that SB 140 was originally written to address rural internet needs. Now, access to faster internet next year is on the line for dozens of rural schools. Okay. Then he goes on to say, quote, I find it distasteful, extremely distasteful, that the rural children of our state are virtually held hostage over our squabbling with a base student allocation.
That was just BS.
He just said, later, distasteful. The guy who held the entire corridor of Knik-Goose Bay and everything else, held them hostage over his spend and over getting votes for his projects and getting votes for his budget that he wanted. Remember how that he was just going to defund the rebuild of one of the most dangerous roads in the state? And he held that hostage. He made it all contingent on whether or not somebody passed the budget that he wanted. Talking about holding people hostage. I mean, come on. That's exact. In fact, at the time, I said this was a hostage situation. And now he's using the same language for the BSA. I mean, it's the process, Bert. I guess you just don't like it when that shoe is on the other foot, do you? You just don't like it when somebody does something similar to what you did and you can't benefit from it. I guess that's all on you, huh? So who voted against the guess who voted against it? Who voted for it? There's a big long list, which we'll get to here in the next segment, and we'll tell you who the standouts were, and we'll continue on here. The Michael Duke Show continues. We got more coming up. Chris Story is going to be joining us here at the end of the show. We'll be getting our weekly uplift, and he says he's ready to go. He says he's ready to go. The dogs are snoring in the background already. We're going to continue the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Back with more after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, we're in the break. Going through here. Stedman's Caitlin Road is debacle. I've heard some whispers about that. I don't even want to get into at this point. Brian says KGB is not a dangerous road. Oh, that's factually inaccurate. KGB, I think, is the second most deadly road, only behind the Seward Highway, I think, in the state of Alaska. I've lived here 10 years, and there's been 12 or 14 people killed on that road in 10 years. It is one of the most dangerous roads in the state, and they have done a big thing. They've made it 4 lanes now. They've finished half of it. They pushed 4 lanes about 4 or 5 miles down Knick-Goose Bay Road. So they are working on it. But yeah, dangerous. It is a dangerous road. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Let's see. Judy Colomb is a real hero for voting no. Along with that. Yeah, I mean, and everybody that's took a stand on that, I think, I think is a hero. I think in that regard, I think they stood by their guns and they did it. I think that is good. 7 members of the Alaska House's Majority Caucus voted with a minority, and you may have some questions if that's one of your if it's one of your representatives. You may have some questions. Ruffridge. Let's see who else. Ruffridge, McCormick, Stapp, Sumner, Wright. They are some of the Republicans that voted in favor of it in the House. And yeah, I got some questions. Got some questions there with that. Why did you vote for it? And of course, David Wilson's vote was very obviously. I mean, I would agree with what Brad said, that you could thank Rob Yunt for the no vote from Wilson on this, because he understands that he is under fire and going to be going to be facing a very, very tough reelection. Brian says, I won't drive the KGB. I actually avoid most of it. I always come in on Vine because I don't like driving down that part of KGB. I almost always come in on Vine and hit the highway from there, because I just don't like KGB. It is it. I thought Julie was a certain yes, said Brian. No, she's actually one that voted against it. She's actually voted against it, against the veto, I guess I should say. So, I mean, it was Allard, Baker, Carpenter, Colomb, Cronk, Eastman, Craig Johnson, and Delana Johnson, both, McCabe, McKay, Prack, Sadler, Shaw, Tilton, Tomaszewski, and Vance all voted against it in the House. So those are your heroes in the House. So, yeah. Yeah, don't get caught up in the tailgating game on KGB. I mean, it's the worst. My kids got hit a few years ago while they were driving behind somebody, and they'd slowed down for that person to make a turn, and somebody just smashed into them at like 50 miles an hour. A road is a mess, man. Like I said, I dip out whenever I can. I dip out on Vine or Clat. Those are my two offshoots. I do not like driving that road, just for safety's sake. All right. We're going to continue here. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that kind of stuff. And we will get back to it. Chris Story, again, coming up here in just a few minutes. Let's get back into it and get her done. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Here we go.
Public enema number one. Oh, wait, sorry. Public enemy number one, which makes more sense. On the other hand, he's a little bit of a pain in the Michael Duke Show.
Pain in the something or other. Pain in the something or other. Welcome back to the Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Hour 2 continues. We've got Chris Story. He's going to be joining us here in a few minutes and giving us, he said, what was his quote? I want to make sure I got the quote right. Double barrel this morning. He's ready. He's got both dogs just sitting right there. The two snore machines are going to be, you'll hear him in the background as he does his show this morning with me. We're going to have a great time. Just me and Chris Story and the dogs. It'll be fantastic. All right, we're ready to go here. One final segment. Everybody right now talking about the we're talking about the veto override that was attempted yesterday, a 39-20 vote. The vote failed during a joint session, 39-20. With the Senate and the House together, one vote shy of the necessary 40 votes to overcome the governor's veto. Prior to the vote, members from both sides predicted that whatever direction the vote took, that it would likely be a razor-close override veto. And as we see here, that is the case. And it originally, by the way, had passed the House at that bill, SB 140, the bill that was vetoed, had originally passed the House 38-2 and had passed the Senate 18-1. So wildly, I mean, that, what is that? 56 out of 56 out of a 60 vote, but ended up being a whole different schlew. And of course, you see all the pictures of all the educators and the people in red and the peer pressure in Juneau, all the people lining the hallways going into the session, making all the legislators take the walk of shame. We see the pictures of some of this stuff. And of course, the one that got me was the one that is the picture in the Alaska Beacon, where they've got Jesse Sumner. Representative Jesse Sumner from Wasilla looks down as he enters the House chambers. He's walking with his head down. He voted yes on the override, which failed by a single vote. But here they are. And of course, all these red T-shirts and everything else. I love the fact that they put the NEA logo on the back of these T-shirts, because that just, again, this is really about one thing. It's really about more money in the long run for the educational industrial complex. That's really what this was about. They say it's about the kids. They say it's for the children. But we know in the long run, because there is no absolute requirement to make sure that money gets into the actual classroom, that it probably won't make that much of a difference in that regard. It will go to pay for the buildings, and it will go to pay for the administrative and overhead staff and all this kind of, I mean, we know that's where it's going to go. And of course, the immediate weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth about how we're now going to have to close everything down. Everything down. Meanwhile, school districts across the state, from the Alaska Beacon, are setting their budgets for the 2024-25 school year without knowing how much money the state will supply. Many districts facing declining enrollment and rising costs have already said they plan to close schools, cut programs, and increase class sizes. Because that's what happens. When you have declining enrollment, you have to do the same with less. Because now you're also, again, serving fewer students. So that just makes sense. Because in the real world, when your audience base contracts, you have to adapt to that. When your customer base contracts, you have to deal with that in the real world. I guess in the world of government and everything else, you just do whatever. Oh, we'll just print more money. It'll be fine. We'll take it from. We just need more money. I don't care where it comes from. Who pays? Who cares? In Fairbanks, the local school district is going to meet tonight and plans to close 2 schools, including the only high school at Eielson. Juneau is going to close 3 buildings. I don't know if that means all 3 are schools or if one's an administration building or what. Juneau will close 3. They were very careful in the wording here. Juneau will close 3 buildings, including 1 middle school, and consolidate all high school students into 1 school. Okay. I mean, again, these are things that happen. And again, that quote from Tom Claymire, the president of the NEA Alaska, I'm afraid the pink slips are going out. You guys planned this all along. You guys have got this all set up so that those pink slips have to go out. The pink slips always go out during the budgeting cycle. I don't know if you've noticed that. The coincidence of how they have the contract set up so that they must notify the teachers within a set amount of days of the end of the school year. And of course, that's the same time the budgeting is going on. And so these teachers can go down there and with a tear in their eye, wave that pink slip saying, I'm going to be laid off, knowing that they're not really going to be laid off. There's a ton of teachers who get pink slips who know for certain that they're not getting laid off, but they've got it for this little piece of political theater where they can sit in front of their assemblies or in front of the legislature and wave it and say, I'm going to be laid off. If that's what has to happen, then that's what has to happen. I mean, I don't mean to sound crass or unfeeling, but that's the real world. Sometimes we get laid off through no fault of our own. Not that that's going to happen. Anyway, it's just, of course, they quote a 17-year-old who has so much real world experience here. It's just astonishing. Julie Colomb of Anchorage was among the 16 House Republicans that voted to sustain the veto. She said she talked to the educators in her district to let them know there's other options. I told them before the vote, if it's sustained, don't lose hope. There's still a lot in play and a lot of will to see something across the finish line, meaning we will see some educational dollars going in there. And they quote the governor at the end. The governor's basically saying there's going to be money in there. There's going to be money. It just depends on how much. And probably, thankfully, it won't be in a BSA that locks that payment in perpetuity. 7 members of the Alaska House Majority Caucus voted with the 16 members of the House minority in an attempt to override the veto. Stanley Wright, the Republican from Anchorage, was one of them. He says, to think that my schools in my district were threatened to be closed not long ago, it really weighed heavy on my heart. He said he's optimistic about getting money for the schools. I think we can do something in 3 days if we want it. Well, I mean, you guys have been sitting on this veto and the threat of a veto for days. Weeks. And the bills that the governor wanted, which, again, I'm glad the governor vetoed it, but I was not a huge fan of adding to the bill that was already there. His basically assertion was, if you put another bill in that has these other things for me, the teacher bonuses and the charter school thing, I will pass everything. Again, how much more? The teacher bonuses were going to be $50 million, right? So it was in addition to the monies, the $200+ million that they'd already had in this SB 140, they were going to add even more. So while I'm happy he vetoed it, I'm also happy that they couldn't get their poop in a group to actually go out there and put something together, because it would have been another $50 million. Now, of course, there's the threats of the lawsuits. Here you go. Education advocates warned that without action before the end of the legislative session, the state may violate the Alaska Constitution, which requires that the state, quote, establish and maintain a system of public schools open to all the children of the state, unquote. Well, tell me how that's been violated now. Because you didn't get the money you want, now you're going to... Carolyn Storm, executive director of the Coalition for Education Equity, said Monday's failed vote means that the state is closer than ever, quote unquote, to a lawsuit challenging the state's current funding levels. We cannot educate our kids when the teacher to student ratio is 1 to 30. That's crowd control. When we don't support our teachers, not with bonuses, but with actual support mechanisms, then we're not providing an adequate public education system. So again, it's not about the teachers. It's not about, the kids in the class. This is about the support mechanisms, the buildings, the administrators, the overhead, all the stuff that we're talking about. That's what it's about. All right, we got to go. I just, again, I'm as happy as I can be on this. That makes me a bad person, I'm sure. Show me on this doll where the show hurt you. All right, we're going to be back. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tear there. Went on a bit of a rant. Here's a bit of a rant this morning. I'm going to go over here, fix this. Put all this, connect that, do that. Let's see if we can get Brad Keithley or get Chris Story on. Okay, look at that. Mash the button, see if we can get him on board. Nope, that's not going to work. Let me try this again. Okay. We're working on it. There we go. All right, let's try this again, shall we? Let's see if we can get Mr. Story on the line here. We'll try this again. Can you hear me? Oh, hey. I'm gonna dial you one more time. One more time. My roadcaster is not cooperating this morning. Let me call you right back. We're going to try this one more time. And then I'm just going to throw the phone across the room, see what we can come up with there. There we go. Now we got it to work.
All right, now.
Hey, it works now. It's amazing.
Perfect. Third time.
Third time's a charm. So you're all ready, double-fisted. You got 2 barrels, 2 dogs, 2 guns, 2 cats, the whole thing. You're
2 minds.
2 minds.
2 brains.
2 brains.
Wasn't that a Steve Martin movie, The Man with 2 Brains?
That was a Steve Martin movie, in fact, The Man with 2 Brains. It's been a hot minute since that thing's been up. You're showing your age, Story. You are showing your age, my friend. Just try not to do that anymore. Okay.
Did you like his show? I think there's 3 seasons out now. Only Murders in the Building.
We watched the first season and we enjoyed it. We just haven't gotten back around to it yet. But we did. We watched it. It's pretty funny. Him and Martin Short.
Martin Short.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty
Ride
funny
together
stuff.
again. 2 amigos. Did you see Chevy Chase to join in?
That's right. 2 of the 3 amigos, and they're good to go. But no, it's a pretty funny show. I did enjoy the season. It's been a while since I watched it, but it's on my watch list to eventually get back to one of these days. You enjoyed it?
Yeah, very much so. All 3 seasons, and I hate to step on Willie Waffle's toes here, so I should back away from this conversation.
Oh no, go ahead.
I thought it was relevant and very emblematic of the 80s, but yet because of their humor and their style. But I think they're timeless. Those guys, they just seem to be having timeless humor and using podcasting as sort of the spine of the show. Really relevant and modern. Pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I really dug it. The whole feel of it was fun, and it was good. It was good. Again, I'm gonna have to get back into it. I'll remind Terry now that you you mentioned it. I'll remind her again and said, "Oh, we got to watch that here one of these days." So
I love that building. I would love to live in a building like that with a restaurant in the lobby. I mean, it would be amazing.
You just went with all those people around poking in your business, Mrs. Dolores Kravis next door, with a cup to the wall, listening to everything you say. Yeah, I'd love to live in a building with all those people. Oh, I roll.
Well, growing up, you probably watched Alex Haley's Hotel with Connie Selica and James Brolin.
No.
You didn't watch that? Oh, it was a great show.
No.
And it just made me, as a kid, I was like, I want to live in that building. I want to live in a hotel. I want room service 24/7 at my availability, housekeeping. This is the way I want to live. It hasn't worked out yet, but we'll see.
Chris just wants to live at the Four Seasons. That's from now on. Hot and cold running water, 24-hour room service, cable TV, the whole thing. He just wants to live there. And, I guess there's a little bit
too much to ask.
Well, I guess there's a something freeing about that. But at the same time, all those people, get away from me. I just cannot deal with the thing. All right, Chris, what are we going to talk about today?
Waddling through life.
Waddling through. I feel attacked. All right, we're gonna get into this then. Chris Story, Waddling Through Life, the Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. I lied. Damn it. Sorry, Chris. That was I got you a little early there because I forgot to change the thing. So I got a minute here. Waddling through life. That really makes me feel. Maybe it's just my own personal hang up at this point. I've been doing some walking, and I feel like maybe sometimes I'm not walking as much as waddling. That's how I feel when I get back to the house.
It's wrong. No. This is the wrong Waddle. This is Wallace D. Waddle, the author.
Oh,
Waddling.
okay. All right. Waddling through, because I'm like,
calm down.
I know. I mean, I'm like, maybe I'm taking offense at that, but I'm trying to get better,
Relax.
Stop mocking my gait. All right. We'll get to it here. Chris Story, back with more of the Michael Duke Show. Now, for real this time. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We're jumping back in. Here we go. Okay, we're continuing on now. One final segment for today. We saved the best for last, or we had to get to the broccoli at the end of the meal. I'm not sure which one it is. Chris Story, the man from Homer, comes in to talk with us. He comes in every week to give us a little bit of an uplift, a PMA boost, a little life coaching lesson. Today, he's going to talk about waddling our way through life. And like I said, I feel a little bit attacked by that, but I'll let you do your thing. Good morning, sir. How are you?
This is about Wallace D. Waddles. So waddling through life, in my interpretation, is Well, he wrote a great little book in 1910, and it was called The Science of Getting Rich. He also wrote The Science of Being Great, The Science of Being Well, and a lot of things. But in The Science of Getting Rich, he studied success in three ways: mind, body, and soul. And he felt and suggested and deduced and he hypothesized that to have a good life, a real good life, a rich life, you have to have wealth in all three categories: your body, your mind, and your soul. In order to do that, in order to have the time, rest, recreation, the things you want to do, have the places you want to go, also what you want to contribute, you must have money. You must have enough money, more than enough money, to be able to be generous, to be able to have the life you want. So, rich is a relative term. Everybody gets to define and decide what rich means to them. However, Wallace D. Wattles suggested that rich was more than enough, and he was pushing you out of your comfort zone necessarily, because there's a certain way to think, there's a certain way to act or behave that will necessarily help you become rich. And if you do this, you can't help but get more, which means you can give more, you can rest more, you can have more of what it is you want in life. So you can hear that, the science of getting rich, and you can hear it as, oh, good Lord, this is just all about money. It isn't just about money, it's about mind, body, and soul. He's a very spiritual man. And it's a great read. If you don't have it in your library, I suggest you get it. It's a simple little read. You can read it in 2 sittings, and it's worth it. So to waddle your way through life is to say, I will have a rich mind, body, and soul, meaning I'll have enough resources in my life such that I can have what I want, give what I want, and be as generous as I want in this life.
So again, I mean, this guy sounds like this guy was all about the science of getting rich, the science of being well, the science of, I mean, he really was into it. He had a system apparently. And so is this as simple as following the dots, connecting the dots and you step 1, step 2, step 3?
In as much as it's accepting that if you think in a certain way, you can't help but get rich. And I give you an example. I'm just in the middle of reading a biography about Jeff Bezos. It's not by Jeff, but it's with his cooperation. So I'm going to take most of it at its word. And we all know Jeff Bezos at any given minute is the richest man in the world or the second richest man in the world, just depending on the stock ticker that day. But as a child, he was recognized as a genius, and he for sure was a prodigy in many, many areas. But that's not why he's the richest man in the world. To quote Obama, your president, Michael, there's a lot of rich people out there. There's a lot of smart people out there. Remember when he said that? There's a lot of smart people out there.
Right.
A lot of hardworking people out there. But the difference is Jeff Bezos thinks differently. He's not just a problem solver in that he could do a Rubik's Cube in 22 seconds, or he can solve a mathematical equation that might take you and me 14, supercomputers to do. Yes, he's got that capability, but it's how he sees the world and he thinks about the world differently. That's why he's the richest man in the world. He thinks differently than most people. You can think that way. You can adopt that mentality. Along the same time that Wallace D. Wattles was writing The Science of Getting Rich, Napoleon Hill coined a phrase, and he would later put it in most of his works, to include The Law of Success and Think and Grow Rich and all the books that he wrote over his lifetime. He said this one phrase repeatedly: whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. So you've got to be able to conceive, which is to think in a certain way, couple it with the belief that it's possible for you, and then set about doing it. You have to find yourself. Luck finds you busy, in other words, I think is another way to put it. But it's just about how you think. So Wallace D. Wattles wrote The Science on purpose. He wanted it to be formulaic. He wanted to make sure that everybody knew this isn't about luck. It's not about where you were born or what you look like or the size of your intellect. If you can read the words he wrote, he said, you can be one of the people that gets rich. If you can read it, if you can think this way and you can think in a certain way, then it's not precluded from you just because you were born in poverty or just because you were born with some ailment or a physical debilitation. It's all, you can overcome it all if you think in that certain way. And that certain way meaning being able to visualize what you want and then going about getting it and doing it. But you have to be able to see it in your mind first, then you can hold it in your hand, to quote a famous TV personality.
Which one's that? So,
Steve
okay.
Harvey.
Yeah. All right. So here you go. This sounds a lot like I watched The Secret. This sounds a lot like some of the similar, again, there's nothing new under the sun. Is The Secret kind of paraphrasing what Waddle was talking about?
That is so funny you should say that. Absolutely, 100, 2,000%. So Rhonda Byrne wrote The Secret, and first the manuscript for the television show or the movie, and then the compendium book that came out with it, inspired almost 100% by Wallace D. Waddle. So she had just lost her father. She'd gone through a divorce and a bit of a financial reversal and was completely down, like in despair, like she'd never been in her life. Number one, she's Australian. So you know what that means, right? I mean, family
So
obviously were criminals.
she was down under to begin with then. I mean,
down under to begin with in a penal colony,
right.
First off. Never let them forget that. But no, down in the dumps completely. And her daughter handed her a book called The Science of Getting Rich. It said, Mom, read this. You need this right now in your life. And she read it. She didn't just read it, she devoured it. And then she began a journey finding modern day people who were espousing the same thing. To your point, nothing new under the sun. So all the people that were included in that movie and then in the compendium book were modern day philosophers who were espousing this very philosophy from Wallace D. Waddles or Napoleon Hill, biblically based, a lot of it. And so, yes, you're 100% correct. This book was I would say that probably the Rosetta Stone for Rhonda Byrne's figuring out this thing called manifesting. How do you manifest in your life what it is you want versus just what you get in any given day? You can just keep showing up and keep getting the same results, or you can do something different and think in a different way. And once she adopted that, she went from poverty to wealth. She went from depression to, manifesting joy and greatness in her life. And you could criticize her all you want for some of the take in that movie. But if you take away from that movie or from the book just one idea, it could enrich your life. One of my great heroes, Wayne Dyer, was asked to be a featured teacher in that movie, and he declined. He said, "I think you're a little too focused on the material piece of this. So I'd rather not be involved because of that." And I agree. And that is the cheesy part of it, where they talk about, oh, you can manifest a brand new car just by visualizing it. The truth of it is you can, but that's not the point of it. What you want is that body, mind, soul, the wealth of all three. And I think that's where they missed a little bit of that in that. But Wallace D. Waddles didn't miss it. And like I said, in 1910, he was thinking about this very deeply. And I think he knew that the word science would attract people to it in a different way than just something, more woo-woo sounding, although this could be conflated into some sort of a new age kind of thought, but it really isn't. It's as old as the Bible.
Well, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. I mean, that's exactly where,
Yes.
That's exactly where that comes from. So give me first steps here, Chris. If I wanted to, first off, obviously I should buy the book because I actually don't own this book. I guess I should go out and dig me up a copy of it. So give me first steps. If somebody's listening out there and they're like, okay, great, I'll give it a try. I'll try anything at this point. I'm so down. The world is so bad, inflation and this and the election and so what are the first steps aside from buying the book? What are the first steps that you recommend for folks to try and bring in this mindset that you're talking about?
I'd suggest opening your mind to the possibility that it's true and accepting that how you've thought so far in life has got you what you've got, gotten you the results you've gotten you to where you are, which you may love. But I challenge you to say, I think you could do more. I think you could have more, contribute more, and be more. All of us could, even the wealthiest among us, or the fittest among us, however you want to look at it. It's an entire philosophy in a single sentence, which is, to paraphrase from Napoleon Hill, whatever you can conceive and believe, you can achieve. If you can visualize it and then begin to act on a certain plan towards it, but you've got to couple it all with belief. If you work against yourself by saying you want something or want to do something, but you really don't believe it's possible, or you really believe the world's out to get you or stop you or hold you back, then it will. So think in a certain way, guided by belief, and you will get it. It may take time. There is no shortcut. It may take time, and you need to be willing to accept that. Consider the Jeff Bezos example. How much time did he suffer? Are you willing to suffer the way he suffered for almost 20 years of losses? Probably most of us wouldn't. And he wasn't starving throughout that time, but he was losing money. And he knew, though, where he was taking Amazon. Just like Wayne Gretzky said, he wasn't the greatest hockey player in the world. He just skated to where the puck was going. That was the difference. And I think Jeff Bezos thinks differently, and he can see where the world's going, and he's moving in that direction. Well, what about you? What do you want? How is the world moving in a way that you can skate to where the puck is already going and work with the forces of nature versus against it, and have whatever slice of the pie you want? It's available to you, dependent upon how you think. And if you think this sounds ridiculous, then it's not for you, and that's okay. But someone right now needed to hear this, and that's why you and I are having this conversation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think, again, to each person, there's a time and a season, and somebody out there just heard what you just said and thought, well, why not? I'll give it a try. They say, why not? What have I got to lose? They'll do it. Or they were looking for one thing to pull them up out of the doldrums or out of their current situation or whatever, the rut that they might be stuck in. It's one of the reasons why I have you on every week, because even, I need that uplift and that reminder every week to make sure that my mind is right and everything else, because let's face it, in this day and age, it's easy to get overwhelmed with the negativity or get down into the minutia of things that you can't control and everything else. So you need a reminder to get your mind right, every week. In fact, you should be doing it every day.
I do. I need it every day. I had a reader, Michael, of The Backyard Millionaire, contacted me and said, because of my challenging the way they think about the world, they thought, I think I can do this. And within a week of reading the book, purchased a property for nothing down. And within 2 years, because that book's now 3 years old, within 2 years or less, actually, they were already $100,000 wealthier in equity than before they read the book. To me, just one idea, whether it's from me or somebody else, could change your life.
That's all it takes. So again, the name of the book is The Science of Being Rich or Becoming
Rich.
Getting Rich. The
Science of Getting Rich.
By Wallace T. Wattles. We should be looking for it. And again, changing your mind. Get your mind right, and the body and everything else will follow. Chris Story, thank you, my friend. As always, it's a pleasure to talk with you.
It's all mine, Michael. Thank you.
All right, folks, we will see you tomorrow. Have a good day. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. All right, Chris, anything else before I let you go, my friend? Any other tidbits of wisdom nuggets that you want to drop on us? Any nuggets your dogs want to drop on us? I mean, what?
I wouldn't dare to. They were a little lackadaisical in the snoring this morning. Reagan's in a bed across the library versus the chair next to me, so I think that's why it didn't quite as loud of quite the volume you're accustomed to.
It's all good. It's all good, man. Just again, it shows us that we're alive, and we got our friends to keep us with us. That's what we're looking for. So we appreciate it, and I appreciate you coming on board. As I said, my friend, it's always good to be with you. So thank you for being part of it today.
Okay, Michael, have a good day.
We'll talk to you again soon. All right, folks. That's it. I'm done. Tomorrow's another day. That was a quick show, wasn't it? Seems like room zoom zoom. Away we go. All right. Tomorrow, Mike Shower and somebody else. We'll have somebody else on as well. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Be kind. Love one another. Live well. We'll see you then.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.